The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the sound of my son's SUV doors locking while I was still standing outside. There I was on the shoulder of Highway 24 inches Colorado, evening wind biting through my cardigan, one hand still holding the paper cup of coffee I'd just bought inside the gas station. My overnight bag was in their trunk. My blood pressure pills were in that bag. My reading glasses, my phone charger, my return ticket to Phoenix, everything I needed was already rolling away with my son, his wife, and my two grandchildren. My grandson twisted around in the back seat, his small palm pressed to the glass. My daughter-in-law never turned around, and my son, my only child, looked at me through the cracked driver's window and said, "Maybe now you'll understand that family matters more than money." Then he drove off. What he didn't understand was that money was never the point. Respect was. And what he also didn't know, not yet, not until later that same night, was that the house he thought he was protecting from me wasn't actually safe in his hands anymore. Because while he was teaching me a lesson on the side of a mountain road, I was about to make one phone call that would change every address in his future. I should have known something was wrong when my son cried too quickly. Ethan had always known how to place emotion in his voice like a hand on your shoulder. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon in February while I was trimming basil on the patio of my condo in Mesa, Arizona. The sun was warm on my knees, and the little ceramic wind chime my sister gave me kept clicking against the railing. "Mom," he said, his breath hitching, "we're in serious trouble." He told me his wife Danielle had supposedly lost her job in Colorado Springs. The mortgage was behind. Their daughter Lily was 13 and thriving in school. Their son Ben had just joined a baseball clinic. If they lost the house, the kids would lose everything stable in their lives. I remember pressing my thumb into one basil leaf until the scent turned sharp and green. "How much do you need?" There was a pause long enough to feel rehearsed. 90,000. It was more than I wanted to hear, and exactly the kind of number designed to stun a mother into silence. I'd spent 6 years rebuilding my savings after my husband passed. I had enough to live with dignity, enough to sleep at night, not enough to make reckless gifts. But I pictured Lily's school backpack by a front door that might not be theirs much longer. I pictured Ben asking why they had to move. So I told Ethan I'd think about it. That evening, I opened my late husband's old leather file box and stared at my accounts. I hadn't said yes yet, but some part of me already knew I would, and that frightened me more than the number did. Love makes promises that wisdom immediately starts trying to undo. By Friday, I was sitting in my attorney's office across from a stack of papers and a yellow legal pad with my own handwriting pressed into it so hard the next page had marks. Margaret Ellis had been my lawyer for years, trim gray bob, pearl earrings, and the kind of steady expression that made foolish people nervous. "If you do this," she said, tapping the pad with her pen, "do it as a secured loan." I nodded. "He's my son, not a stranger." "And that," she said gently, "is exactly why paperwork matters." We arranged it so the $90,000 would be a formal loan with a lien against the house, 2 years for repayment. If they defaulted or attempted to transfer the property without settlement, I could call the note due. When I told Ethan about the documents, he laughed a little too lightly. "Mom, you really don't mess around." "No," I said, "not anymore." He signed everything that weekend through overnight mail. Danielle added her signature too, all neat loops and polished calm. 3 days later, I wired the money. Afterward, Ethan called, sounding almost boyish with relief. "You saved us." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because it warmed me, but because it sat strangely in my chest. Saved us. As if I had become not his mother, but his emergency exit. For the first month, he called every Sunday. He gave updates about job searches, school projects, baseball practice, and the kind of small domestic details meant to reassure. Danielle even got on the phone once to thank me, her voice soft as folded tissue. And for a little while, I let myself believe I had done something beautiful. But quiet has a way of changing flavor. By April, the calls were shorter. By May, they felt managed. And somewhere in that silence, a new question began to form. If everything was so difficult, why did they suddenly sound so comfortable? The first lie I caught wasn't a lie meant for me, it was one told to a child. It happened on a Sunday evening when Ethan accidentally answered on video and handed the phone to Lily before he realized what he'd done. Her face popped onto my screen in a wash of pink bedroom walls and fairy lights. "Grandma June," she said, "are you really too busy to come visit us this summer?" I felt something cold settle right between my ribs. "Too busy?" She frowned. "Dad said you kept saying no. I wanted you to see my art fair. I got first place for charcoal." In the background, I heard Ethan's footsteps hit hardwood fast and sharp. "Lily, honey, give me that." A second later, his face appeared, damp-haired and tight around the eyes. "Sorry, Mom. Kids get things mixed up." I kept my voice level. "Did you tell them I didn't want to come?" "No, of course not." But his gaze slid away from the camera as he said it. After we hung up, I sat very still in my kitchen with the ceiling fan humming overhead and a mug of tea cooling untouched beside my elbow. I replayed every postponed invitation, every last-minute excuse, every awkward change of subject whenever I mentioned visiting Colorado. Then I did something I had resisted for weeks. I booked a flight. Some of you know that wait, the moment when hope is still alive, but suspicion has already put on its coat. I told myself there could be an explanation. Maybe Danielle was embarrassed. Maybe Ethan had been trying to spare me travel costs. Maybe they planned to surprise me once things settled. I landed in Denver on a clear Saturday and rented a silver sedan that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The drive south felt full of mercy. I imagined Lily running to the door with charcoal on her fingers. I imagined Ben showing me a baseball glove too big for his hand. When I turned into their neighborhood, mercy ended. Because struggling families do not usually greet you with a brand new black Range Rover in the driveway. I knew I had been lied to before my son even opened the door. The lawn was professionally edged. White tulips stood in fresh mulch beds. There was a new security camera above the garage and patio furniture that looked like it had come from one of those catalogs people leave on purpose on coffee tables. This was not desperation. This was presentation. When I rang the bell, I heard laughter inside, adult laughter, relaxed and social. Then Danielle's voice floated down the hallway. "Ethan, can you get that? I'm finishing the appetizer board." Appetizer board. Not, "We were about to eat leftovers." Not, "Sorry, the house is chaos." No, appetizer board. Ethan opened the door and went pale enough that I could see the freckles on his nose again, the same ones he had at 10. "Mom?" "Surprise," I said. His smile arrived too late and sat crooked on his face. He stepped aside. Inside, the house looked even worse, in the best possible way. Polished wood floors, a new sectional, a wall of floating shelves, oversized abstract art in blues and golds. The air smelled like baked brie and rosemary. Danielle came out of the kitchen carrying a tray with tiny crackers topped with goat cheese and honey. Her expression froze before it rearranged itself. "June, oh my goodness, you should have told us." "I wanted to see the children." A beat. "Lily's at a friend's," Ethan said. "And Ben has a birthday party?" Danielle added. Both children gone. Same afternoon, same timing, convenient enough to sound insulting. I sat anyway. I complimented the home. I asked about Danielle's job search and watched her blink once before, saying, "Still looking." The lie landed between us like a glass bead on tile. An hour later, when it became clear I was not invited to stay and not especially welcome to linger, Ethan walked me to my rental car. "Next time," he said, "just give us a little notice." As I pulled away, I looked back in the mirror and saw him standing on a porch I had helped save. He didn't wave. That night in my hotel room, I opened my laptop, and the first public record I found made my fingertips go numb on the keyboard. Danielle had started a new job 3 months earlier. Nothing breaks trust faster than discovering the facts are calmer than the lies. Once I started looking, the story unraveled with embarrassing ease. Danielle wasn't unemployed. She had been hired by a marketing firm in downtown Colorado Springs in March. Ethan had renewed the family club membership at a private recreation center in April. The Range Rover had been financed in May. And their social media, carefully limited but not careful enough, showed patio dinners, ski weekends, a kitchen remodel, and one smiling photo of Danielle holding a shopping bag from a luxury boutique. I drove past their street again the next morning and saw Lily chalking flowers on the driveway while Ben rode a scooter in circles. So much for birthday parties and busy schedules. I stayed in Colorado 2 extra days, long enough to let anger settle into shape. By the time I called Ethan from my hotel room, I no longer wanted excuses. I wanted clarity. Is Danielle working? I asked. Silence. Then, Mom, why are you asking like that? Because I know she is. Another silence, this one flatter, colder. So what if she found something that doesn't erase the damage from before? You told me you were drowning. We were. Then things improved. You bought a luxury car. His tone changed. You don't get to audit our life because you helped us. Helped us. Not borrowed from me. Not owe me. Helped us. That was when the language shifted completely. I could hear it. In his mind, I was no longer family. I was either a resource or an obstacle. That afternoon, I called Margaret. She reviewed the file and spoke in the same even voice she used when weather became dangerous. You are protected, she said. The lien is valid. If they refuse payment or place the asset at risk, you have options. I hung up and sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at the floral bedspread and a thin Bible in the nightstand drawer. I still wasn't ready to go nuclear. Not yet. I thought maybe if I gave Ethan one more chance to remember who he was, he might take it. Instead, 2 weeks later, he called with an offer so insulting it finally removed the last of my doubt. Some invitations are not invitations at all, they're disguised demotions. Mom, Ethan said, sounding cheerful in the way people do when they've already decided you should be grateful, Danielle and I had an idea. Why don't you move in with us? For one full breath, my heart lifted. I'm not proud of that. At 69, a woman should know better than to confuse usefulness with belonging, but I did. Really? Of course. The kids miss you. And honestly, your condo fees, utilities, everything in Arizona, that's a lot. If you lived with us, you could save money and be closer to family. I waited. Then came the real part. You'd have your own room downstairs, he continued. And with Danielle working again, a little help with Ben after school would be huge. Maybe dinner a few nights a week. Nothing crazy. Just pitching in. There it was. Not, we want you. Not, we've been unfair. Not, come be part of our life. He wanted a live-in grandmother with a pension. What about the loan? I asked. He gave a short laugh. Well, if you're living here, I figured we'd sort of fold that into the arrangement. You wouldn't need the money back so urgently. I looked around my Arizona condo as he spoke, the woven throw over my reading chair, the blue pottery bowl from Santa Fe, the framed photo of my husband smiling under a fishing hat 20 years out of date. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Quiet, clean, dignified, earned. Let me think about it, I said. He sounded satisfied, like a deal was already breathing. The next morning I called him back. No. Silence. Then, sharper. No? I am not giving up my home to become unpaid help in yours. Wow, he said. That's harsh. No. It's accurate. His voice lost all softness. You always say family helps family. I did help family. $90,000 worth. He exhaled through his nose. You really care more about that money than your relationship with us? That familiar silence settled in the room again. And this time, instead of shrinking under it, I sat up straighter. No, I said. I care more about respect. Once I refused to be useful on their terms, they stopped pretending to be decent on theirs. After that call, the delays became open defiance. June passed with no payment. July came and went with no proposal, no partial transfer, no attempt at good faith. When I texted Ethan, he replied hours later. When I called, it went to voicemail more often than not. Once, Danielle answered and said Ethan was in a meeting while I could hear a baseball game broadcasting behind her. Margaret sent a formal notice requesting they begin repayment under the original terms or provide a documented plan. Ethan responded not with money, but with attitude. He called me on a Thursday evening while I was slicing peaches over the sink. "This is getting ridiculous," he snapped. "Lawyers? Really? You signed the documents. You're my mother, and I was your mother when I wired the money." He muttered something under his breath, then louder. "Maybe we should all get away together. Reset." That was his pitch. A Labor Day road trip through Colorado. Mountains. Family time. The kids wanted me there. Danielle thought it would be healing. He said the word healing the way salesmen say custom. I should have refused. Instead, I heard Lily's laugh in my mind and Ben asking if I wanted the window seat. I heard the version of my son I kept trying to rescue from the man he had become. So I said yes. I packed lightly, just like Ethan told me. One navy sweater, walking shoes, my toiletry bag, my medications lined up in a plastic organizer. I baked oatmeal cookies with raisins because Ben liked them soft in the center. I bought Lily a boxed charcoal set and Ben a new baseball cap with a stitched Colorado flag on the front. That Friday morning, their SUV rolled up just after 8. Danielle wore oversized sunglasses. Ethan seemed oddly upbeat. Lily hugged me hard. Ben smelled like grape gum and sunscreen. For the first 3 hours, it almost felt real. That was the cruelest part. If this touched you, subscribe. Real power moves in silence. Because what happened next only worked because I allowed myself one more small piece of hope. The conversation that ruined everything began over coffee and chicken tenders. We stopped at a roadside diner near Woodland Park around noon. It had red vinyl booths, paper placemats, and one of those pie spinners by the register that makes every dessert look lonelier than it is. The kids were restless, and after lunch, Ethan suggested they go wash their hands and look at the souvenir shelf near the front. The moment they were out of earshot, Danielle folded her napkin carefully and said, "We need to talk about the loan." There was no warmth in her face now. No wife-like politeness, just business. Ethan leaned in. "We've been going over our finances, and honestly, paying you back that whole amount isn't realistic." I set my coffee down. "Realistic?" Danielle nodded. "Now that we've stabilized, we have new obligations. Activities, savings, the house, repairs." The house I helped save. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mom, we were in crisis. We signed whatever was in front of us." "You signed a legal agreement." He spread his hands as though I were being dramatic. "Paperwork shouldn't matter more than family." I looked out the window. Ben was trying to spin a rack of postcards with one finger. Lily had found a stuffed moose and was showing it to him. They looked so normal. That hurt more than shouting would have. Danielle lowered her voice. "The kids feel the tension, June. They're starting to think you don't like being around us." There it was. The children, pulled quietly like knives from a drawer. "You are not going to use them to bully me." Ethan sat back. "Then stop acting like a creditor." "I am a creditor." The silence at the table thickened. Ice shifted in Danielle's water glass. A waitress passed, carrying a plate of fries, and somewhere near the kitchen someone laughed too loudly. Finally, Ethan said, "You need perspective." I wish I had walked away right then. I wish I had called a cab from that diner and gone straight to the airport. Instead, I followed them back into the SUV and thought the worst had already happened. But the worst, I learned, always likes a prettier setup. By the time they pulled into the overlook, they had already decided I was no longer a person. The road climbed higher, curving through pine and rock. Clouds gathered in long gray bands over the mountains. Ben had fallen asleep with his mouth open. Lily was sketching out the window in a spiral notebook. Around 4:30, Ethan said there was a scenic stop ahead. "Let's stretch our legs." The place was hardly scenic, just a lonely pullout with 2 picnic tables, a shuttered visitor kiosk, and a gas station tucked off the highway. Wind pushed grit over the pavement. There was one pickup truck parked by the curb. We all got out. Danielle told the kids to stay close. I walked a few steps toward the guardrail and took a picture of the ridgeline glowing under the late light. Then I heard the engine. At first it didn't register. Families start cars at rest stops all the time. But when I turned, Ethan was in the driver's seat. Danielle was already buckled in. Lily looked confused. Ben had that stunned, watchful stillness children get when adults are doing something wrong and they know it. I stepped toward the SUV. What are you doing? Ethan rolled down his window halfway. This isn't working. The wind snatched at my hair. What does that mean? It means maybe some time alone will help you think about your priorities. Ethan, Danielle wouldn't meet my eyes. There's a station here. Someone can help. My mouth actually went dry. You're leaving me? You chose this, Ethan said. You chose money over family. In the back seat, Lily pressed both hands to the glass. Dad? I moved closer, one hand on the door handle, but it was locked. My bag is in the trunk. My medicine is in there. Ethan looked straight ahead. Please, I said, and I will never forget that word leaving my mouth. He put the SUV in drive. The tires spit gravel. The red taillights flashed once. Then the car disappeared around the bend, taking my luggage, my medication, and the last lie I could still tell myself about my son. For several seconds, I just stood there with the cold coffee cup still in my hand. Then I dropped it, and the sound of it hitting the pavement was what finally told me this was real. The cold inside that gas station felt cleaner than what my son had just done. I sat by the fogged-up window with a paper cup trembling in my hand, trying to understand how a woman could raise a child for 45 years and still end up abandoned beside a highway. My suitcase, my medicine, even my phone charger were gone with Ethan. So was the last easy excuse I could make for him. A young clerk named Nate noticed me after a while. He asked if I needed help, and I told him the truth. My family left me here. His face changed instantly. That look from a stranger, pure shock, pure decency, hit harder than the wind outside. Because in 1 second, a boy I didn't know treated me with more humanity than my own son had. Nate helped me before he even knew my last name. He brought me the landline, a bottle of water, and a pack of crackers I hadn't asked for. He spoke softly, like he understood that dignity matters most when someone has just been humiliated. My first call was to my sister, Elaine. When she answered, I tried to stay calm. I made it 6 words. They left me on the highway. Silence. Then her voice turned hard as iron. Text me the address. I'm coming now. While I waited, I checked my banking app using the station Wi-Fi. That's when my stomach dropped. 2 fresh charges. An electronics store. A steakhouse. Over $800. They had used my card while I was stranded. That was the moment my grief changed shape. It stopped pleading. It started keeping score. Elaine didn't waste time comforting me with lies. She gave me clarity instead. She arrived after dark, stepped out of her car, and hugged me so tightly I nearly broke apart right there by the gas pump. On the drive back to Denver, I told her everything: the fake hardship, the polished house, the pressure to forgive the loan, the road trip, the abandonment, the charges on my card. When I finished, she kept both hands on the wheel and said, June, they planned this. I stared at the mountains sliding past in the dark. He's still my son, I whispered. She didn't soften. Then your son is a criminal. That word sat between us the rest of the ride. At her house, I canceled the card, locked my accounts, and sat awake past midnight. By morning, I knew exactly who I needed to call. My lawyer. Margaret's voice was the first thing that made me feel safe again. She listened without interrupting, then asked only practical questions. Dates, times, documents, witnesses, charges. When I finished, she grew very quiet. Then she said, June, Ethan already called me yesterday. I froze. He demanded I remove the lien. Claimed you'd agreed to forgive the debt. Something inside me went still. Not because I was surprised. Because I finally wasn't. Margaret explained my rights clearly. The lien was valid. The default was real. If I wanted, she could begin formal action immediately. I looked across Elaine's kitchen at a bowl of oranges in morning light and thought about the moment Ethan refused to unlock the car door. Yes, I said. I want the loan called. The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt overdue. And once I said them, I never wanted to take them back. The demand letter didn't create panic. It revealed it. By the afternoon it was delivered, my phone was exploding. Ethan called 6 times. Danielle called twice. Then came the voicemails. First outrage, then bargaining, then blame. Mom, this is insane. You're overreacting. The kids don't deserve this. Not once did either of them ask whether I was all right after the highway. Not once did they mention my medicine, my return trip, or the fact that they had stolen from me while I was stranded. That silence told me more than any confession could. Later that night, Ethan left one message, colder than the rest. If you do this, he said, don't expect the children to understand why they lost their home. I listened to it twice. Then I forwarded it to Margaret, because a threat sounds different once you stop calling it emotion. They didn't just want my money, they wanted my credibility. 2 days later, a neighbor from my Arizona condo called to say Ethan had been asking questions about me. Strange questions. Was I forgetful, confused, repeating myself? Had I seemed unstable lately? I felt my blood go cold. He was laying groundwork to challenge my mental competence. Margaret acted fast. She arranged an independent evaluation with a neuropsychologist in Denver. 4 hours of testing later, I had a formal report saying I was sharp, competent, and fully capable of making financial decisions. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something sadder. My son wasn't just trying to escape a debt. He was trying to turn age itself into a weapon against me. That afternoon, I placed the report in a folder labeled Evidence. And for the first time in my life, I realized documentation could feel like self-respect. Then they used the grandchildren. That was the line they should never have crossed. A child welfare investigator showed up at Elaine's front door with Lily and Ben standing beside her. Lily ran straight into my arms, crying. Grandma June, Dad said you didn't want us anymore. I nearly lost my balance. The investigator explained that Ethan and Danielle had reported I was the one who abandoned the family during the trip, that I had stormed off in anger, frightened the children, and created an unsafe situation. I looked at Lily's blotchy face, at Ben standing rigid with confusion, and understood exactly what they were doing. They weren't defending themselves. They were rewriting reality through the children. I told the investigator everything, calmly, carefully. Then I showed her receipts, fraud reports, timelines, and bank alerts. By the time she left, her eyes had changed. She no longer looked at me like the suspect. That night, I stopped asking whether I was being too harsh. I sat awake at Elaine's dining table with a yellow legal pad, writing down every detail I could remember. The diner, the rest stop, the words Ethan used, the sound of the locks, the timestamps on the fraudulent charges. Every lie had to be pinned down before it could slither into something softer. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork. It was hearing Lily's voice in my head. Dad said you didn't want us anymore. For one weak moment, I thought about dropping everything, letting the money go, walking away just to stay in the children's lives. Then I remembered sitting alone in that gas station while my son bought himself dinner with my card. No, giving in wouldn't restore love. It would only teach them that cruelty works. By sunrise, I was done wavering. Once I chose to fight back, the truth started arriving faster than their excuses. Margaret connected me with a private investigator named Ray Morales, a former detective with a patient voice and tired eyes. Within 48 hours, he found what I had only suspected. Danielle had never really been unemployed in the way they'd claimed. Their financial crisis wasn't a collapse, it was a cover. Luxury purchases, hidden debt, and gambling losses sat underneath the whole performance like rotten beams under a polished floor. Then Ray found screenshots, photos of my cards, notes about my accounts, images taken inside their own home when I had visited. They hadn't acted impulsively. They had prepared. I sat in Elaine's guest room holding those pages, feeling sick in a very old, very feminine way, the kind that comes when betrayal is no longer emotional, but methodical. That was the day my anger became clean, useful. The house began slipping away from them the same week the criminal file opened. Because of the lien, the default, and the evidence of fraud, legal pressure moved quickly. Notices were filed. Sale proceedings advanced. Their beautiful home, the one they thought proved I was foolish, became the instrument that would recover what they stole. Ethan called the night the listing went live. Did you really do this? He asked, voice ragged. Yes. You're tearing apart your own family. I stood by Elaine's kitchen window, looking at my reflection in the dark glass. No, Ethan, I'm refusing to fund the people who did. He started crying then. Real or strategic, I no longer cared. Because somewhere between the highway and that moment, I had learned something late but valuable. Love can mourn someone, and still lock the door. The next morning, there was an offer above, asking. I did not win back the life I had before. I won back myself. The sale closed. My money was recovered. Charges followed: fraud, exploitation, identity theft, false reporting. The children were placed temporarily with safer family, and for the first time in months, I heard Lily laugh on the phone without fear in it. That sound mattered more than the money ever had. People imagine justice as a loud thing: courtrooms, headlines, handcuffs. Sometimes it is quieter. Sometimes it is a woman sitting at her sister's kitchen table, signing papers with steady hands after years of being too forgiving. I still grieve the son I thought I had. I still do. But grief and clarity can live in the same heart. He left me on the highway believing fear would bring me crawling back. Instead, it sent me forward. And from that night on, I never confused love with permission again.